August 23rd, 1945, Fort Chaffee, Arkansas. Greta Hartman smelled bacon before she understood where she was. She was 24 years old, blonde hair pulled back tight against her skull, green eyes that had learned to scan doorways before entering them, 5 feet 4 inches of muscle memory and practiced silence. The truck had stopped moving 10 minutes ago, maybe 15. Time felt unreliable. The gate had opened with a sound like breaking teeth. Now she stood at the threshold of a building she did not recognize, and the smell came through the doorway in a slow wave. Warm, steady, pressing against her face as if the room itself was breathing. Bacon. The realization landed without warning. Not the thin grey substitute they'd eaten in the camps, not the memory of bacon, the idea of it stretched across years until it became more concept than food. This was the real thing? Fat meeting heat, smoke curling upward with patience. The kind of smell that belonged in kitchens, not prisons. Her steps faltered for half a second, just long enough to notice the heat radiating from inside. The kind of heat that came from stoves that had been running all morning. Her mind rejected it immediately. Smells could lie. Guards cooked for themselves. Kitchens existed for reasons that had nothing to do with prisoners. She told herself this as she crossed the threshold, her boots scraping softly against the wooden floor. No one shouted, no rifles lifted. The room was already awake, low ceiling, thick beams darkened by years of steam and smoke. Morning light filtered through narrow windows, cutting pale stripes across the floor. The air moved differently here. Not the stale, held breath quality of the transport ship or the barracks. This air circulated, it carried information. Cast iron sang somewhere to her left. A clean, confident sound. The sharp hiss of bacon hitting a pan. Utensils answered back. A spoon tapping metal. A ladle scraping the edge of a pot. Familiar sounds arranged in a way she didn't recognize. These were not emergency sounds. They were routine. She held her tray with both hands, the metal cool against her palms. Too clean, too smooth. Around her, the other women moved forward in silence, shoulders tight, eyes scanning. No one spoke. Breath stayed shallow. They advanced as if approaching something that might vanish if touched too quickly. Greta had imagined this moment many times during the crossing. Capture meant lines, counting. Orders barked until language lost meaning. Food, if it came at all, came as punishment or demonstration. A piece of bread thrown on the ground. A cup of water measured to remind you of thirst. That was how it had been explained. That was how it was supposed to be. This wasn't that. The serving counter came into view. Behind it stood an American cook, broad-shouldered, sleeves rolled up, hands moving without hesitation. He didn't look at them. He didn't need to. His motions were practiced. Exact. Eggs slid onto trays, bacon followed, bread appeared. Thick slices, white and soft, already buttered. Butter, the word echoed where warning should have been. She watched the butter melt slowly into the bread, turning its surface glossy. No ration marks, no weighing, no pause to calculate portions or checklists. The cook added a mug, ceramic not tin, filled nearly to the rim. Steam lifted from it, faint but unmistakable. Coffee. Her chest tightened. Not from hunger. Hunger was familiar. Hunger was orderly. This feeling had no name. She stepped forward. When the woman ahead of her moved, the tray in her hands felt heavier now, as if the food itself carried weight. When the cook set it down, the metal rang softly. A small sound. Ordinary. "Move along," he said. Not sharp, not kind, just said. She carried the tray to the table and sat. The bench creaked beneath her. Across from her, another woman stared at her food as if waiting for it to speak, to accuse, to explain itself. No one ate. The room filled slowly, chairs scraping, trays settling. The low hum of bodies existing in the same space. Somewhere a clock ticked. Outside, a truck engine started, then faded away. Still nothing happened. She picked up her fork. The handle was smooth. Warm from the room, she pressed it into the eggs. They yielded easily. Steam rose, brushing her knuckles. She froze, fork suspended halfway between plate and mouth. This was wrong, not dangerous wrong, worse, illogical. In every place she had known before, eating had been observed, monitored, used to measure obedience. Here it seemed to be treated as maintenance, fuel, something that needed doing, nothing more. She scanned the room again, this time not looking for danger, but for explanation. She found none. The guards stood to the side, talking quietly. One leaned against the wall, arms crossed loosely. His posture was relaxed. Another flipped through a folded paper, not even looking up. No one carried a notebook. No one marked tallies, no one pointed. The absence of surveillance felt like exposure. She lowered the fork. Free food did not exist. It never had. In Germany, food had rules. It was counted, stretched, replaced with substitutes. Every bite carried calculation. Mothers ate last. Children learned not to ask. Here no one was counting. No one watched her tray. No one wrote anything down. She waited for the correction. For the moment when generosity revealed its purpose, for a hand to reach in and take something away, for laughter, for the lesson. Nothing came. She lifted the mug instead. The heat seeped into her palms. She inhaled once. The smell filled her head, bitter and rich, unmistakably real. The war was over. She knew that in theory. Germany had fallen. Maps had changed. Orders had stopped coming. But theories were distant things. This smell, this heat, this quiet, this was immediate. This was America, not the America she had been taught to expect. An America that fed its prisoners without spectacle, that cooked breakfast as if tomorrow was assumed, that did not need her to understand in order to continue protecting her. She took a small sip. The coffee burned her tongue. She welcomed the pain. It made sense. Everything else did not. And in that moment, before she took her first real bite, she understood only this. Nothing she had been told had prepared her for this. The fork stayed in her hand longer than it should have. Not because she was undecided, because she was waiting. Waiting for the sound that never came. The shout. The correction. The order that would restore the world to something recognizable. Around her, the room continued its quiet work. Chairs shifted. Someone coughed. Bacon disappeared from plates at a steady, unremarkable pace. The clock on the wall ticked forward, indifferent. Time moved as if nothing unusual were happening. That was what frightened her most. She brought the fork to her mouth at last and took a small bite. Too small, a habit learned early. The eggs were soft, warm, almost sweet. Her body reacted before her mind did. Muscles loosening, breath deepening, she forced herself to stop chewing halfway through, jaw tightening as if she had been caught doing something wrong. She swallowed anyway. Nothing happened. She waited a few seconds longer than necessary, eyes lowered, counting without numbers. When no one intervened, she reached for the bread. Instead of biting into it, she tore off a corner with her fingers. A small piece, safe. She placed the rest back on the tray. Clearly, visibly, untouched. Proof, if proof was required, that she had not taken more than her share. She ate the corner slowly. Across the table, another woman did the same thing. Tear pause, look up, look away. Their movements mirrored each other without coordination, the way people do when following rules that no one has spoken aloud. Greta slid the remaining bread closer to her body. Not to steal it, to guard it. Her elbow shifted almost imperceptibly, creating a small barrier. The motion was automatic. She noticed it only after it was done. Her left hand moved next. It folded the edge of her sleeve inward, creating a narrow pocket against her wrist. When no one was looking, when she believed no one was looking, she slipped a thin strip of bacon inside, the grease already soaking into the fabric. It felt absurd, dangerous, necessary. She kept her face still as she did it. No sudden movements, no glances toward the guards, just another woman eating breakfast. Nothing to see here. She had done this before, many times, on trains, in shelters, in kitchens that had no windows because glass had become a luxury. You hid food not because you planned to steal, but because tomorrow was uncertain and memory was unreliable. Food disappeared. People disappeared faster. She lifted her mug again and took another sip of coffee. The bitterness grounded her, gave her something sharp to hold on to. Around the rim, her lips left a faint mark. She wiped it away immediately with her thumb. Traces were not safe. She told herself to stop. She didn't. The butter on her bread had melted completely now. It pooled in the small indentations, catching light. She stared at it longer than she should have. Her mind went somewhere else, somewhere before the sirens, before the lines, before the cards and rules that multiplied faster than bread. Dresden, 1942. Her mother's kitchen. Morning light slanted through the small window, catching dust in the air. The table was scrubbed clean, its surface worn smooth by years of use. A single loaf lay between them, wrapped in cloth. Her mother stood at the counter, back turned, slicing the bread carefully, each piece the same thickness. No one spoke while she did it. This was important work. Butter was scarce even then. When it appeared, it was pale and hard, scraped thin with a knife warmed in water. Her mother always spread it first on Greta's piece, then on hers, then on her own. What remained was barely enough to taste. "You take it," she would say, as if it were nothing. "I don't need much." It had never been true. The memory shifted. Later years. The bread thinner now. Coffee replaced with something darker. Bitterer. That smelled faintly of burnt grain. They drank it anyway. Hands wrapped around chipped cups, pretending warmth could be borrowed from ritual. Her mother's hands had grown rougher. The skin cracked in winter, split open by work and cold. Still, she smiled when she placed food in front of her daughter, still insisted. Greta blinked hard. The present rushed back in a blur. The fork was in her hand, the bread on her tray, the smell of coffee still in the air. She was not in Dresden. She was here. Fort Chaffee, Arkansas. A prisoner eating butter while her mother had none. She set the mug down carefully, so it wouldn't rattle. The ceramic made a soft sound against the wood. Too loud, she thought. Everything felt too loud. She cut another piece of egg, smaller this time. She chewed until it lost shape, until it was safe to swallow without drawing attention. She felt ridiculous. And yet she could not stop. Every movement was governed by the same unspoken rule. Do not reveal need. Need invited punishment. Across the room a woman laughed suddenly, a short, startled sound, as if it had escaped by accident. Heads turned. For a brief moment tension tightened the air. The woman clamped a hand over her mouth. Eyes wide. Nothing followed. The laugh was allowed to exist. It hung there for a second, then faded into the background hum. No reprimand, no warning. The room did not stiffen around it. Greta felt her stomach twist. This was worse than cruelty. Cruelty made sense. Cruelty confirmed what she had been taught. This quiet permission, left no place to hide. She reached for the bacon again and hesitated. Her fingers hovered, unsure which instinct to trust. Take it now while it's here, or leave it to show restraint. Restraint had kept her alive. She tore the strip in half. One piece went into her mouth. The other disappeared into her sleeve. Grease darkened the fabric immediately. She didn't care. Fabric could be washed, hunger could not. She chewed, eyes fixed on the table, heart beating too fast for the calm around her. She was certain, absolutely certain, that at any moment a voice would call her out, that someone would point, that this strange generosity would snap shut like a trap. She waited. The clock ticked on. People stood when they finished eating, Trays were stacked neatly. No one rushed, no one hovered. The line moved in reverse now, women leaving in ones and twos, as if departing a church. When Greta finally stood, her legs felt unsteady, as if she had been holding herself rigid for too long. She carried her tray to the return counter and set it down. The cook Henrik, she would learn later, though she did not know his name, yet nodded once, barely perceptible, and slid it into place. That was all. Outside, the air felt cooler, thinner. She took a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her sleeve brushed against her side, and she felt the hidden bacon there. Warm and real. Proof that the meal had happened. Proof that she had survived it. As she walked away from the building, she understood something with sudden clarity. The fear had not come from hunger. Hunger was simple. The fear came from this. The belief that nothing good was ever free, that kindness was never accidental, that every gift carried a debt, waiting patiently to be collected. She did not yet know what America would ask in return, only that she was certain it would ask something. And until that moment arrived, she would eat slowly. She would hide what she could. She would keep watching the room. Because fear once learned does not end when the war does. It only learns new places to wait. She did not sleep that night, not because of noise. The barracks were quiet, almost unnaturally so. No shouting, no boots pacing outside, just the slow, uneven breathing of women who had spent the day holding themselves rigid. She lay on her back, staring at the underside of the bunk above her. The smell of breakfast clung to her clothes, faint now but still there. Bacon, grease in the fabric of her sleeve, coffee in her hair. It felt wrong to carry those smells into the dark. In the camps she had known before, smells were erased quickly. Hunger burned them away, fear replaced them. Here they lingered. That was the hook her mind kept catching on, the lingering, the persistence, the way nothing seemed to end when it was supposed to. The next morning, when the bell sounded, her body reacted before her thoughts did. She sat up at once, heart already racing, hands reaching automatically to check her sleeves, her pockets. The strip of bacon was gone. She had eaten it in the night, slowly, in the dark, each bite measured and silent. Even then she had half expected someone to stop her. No one had. She joined the line again, shoulders tense, prepared for correction, prepared for yesterday to be revealed as a mistake. A one-time indulgence, a demonstration before discipline. The doors opened. The smell was there again, not weaker, not altered. The same warm, steady presence. Bacon, coffee, bread. As if nothing needed to be explained, as if yesterday had not been an exception, but a rule. That was when the fear sharpened into something else, because repetition meant intention. Inside the room looked exactly the same. Same beams, same light, same quiet competence. The cook worked the pans without ceremony. The guards stood where they had stood before. Nothing had been adjusted in response to her suspicion. Nothing acknowledged that she had spent the night waiting for this moment to be different. She took her tray. The food arrived with the same economy of motion. Eggs, bacon, bread, butter, coffee. No hesitation, no glance at her hands, no pause to see what she would do with it. She sat. This time she forced herself not to tear the bread immediately. She kept her hands flat on the table, palms down, fingers spread, as if to show she was capable of restraint. Her pulse beat against her wrists. Across the table, a woman lifted her mug and drank deeply. Too deeply. The sound of swallowing was loud in the quiet room. No one reacted. The woman blinked, startled by her own boldness, then laughed under her breath. A different laugh than yesterday. Softer, less frightened. Greta watched all of it, waiting for the invisible line to appear. The boundary that would clarify the rules. It didn't. She reached for the mug. As she did, she realized it had been nudged closer to her side of the table, just slightly, enough that she hadn't noticed it move, only that it was suddenly within easier reach. She looked up. One of the guards stood near the aisle, young. Barely 19, she thought. His uniform hung loose at the shoulders, as if he hadn't quite grown into it yet. He had his back half turned. Attention on something down the row, as if the movement of the mug had not required thought. She lifted it carefully. The coffee was still hot. A moment later, a folded square of paper appeared near her tray. A napkin, clean, white. She stared at it longer than she should have. No one explained why it was there. No one said her hands looked dirty. No one implied she needed it. It had simply been placed within reach. She wiped her fingers slowly, deliberately, then folded the napkin again, aligning the edges as precisely as she could. Order was comforting. Order meant safety. She ate. Not quickly, not fully at ease, but she ate more than she had yesterday. She cut the eggs instead of tearing them. She bit into the bread instead of breaking it apart. Butter smeared against her lips. She wiped it away at once, glancing up instinctively. The guard had moved on. No one was watching. That realization landed heavier than the food. In every place she had known before eating had been observed, monitored, used to measure obedience. Here it seemed to be treated as maintenance, fuel, something that needed doing, nothing more. She finished her meal. When she stood, the guard nearest her stepped aside without comment, giving her room to pass. Not a gesture of deference, just courtesy. The kind extended without calculation. Outside, the morning sun was already warm. Somewhere beyond the fence, engines started. A train whistle sounded in the distance, long and steady, not urgent. She paused at the edge of the yard, her breath slowing, her hands empty for the first time in days. No food hidden, no proof needed. For the first time since her capture, she understood what unsettled her so deeply. They were not trying to convince her of anything. They were not asking her to believe. They were simply feeding her. And that simple fact, unobserved, unrecorded, uncelebrated, felt more dangerous than any rifle ever pointed in her direction. Because if this was how they lived, then everything she had been taught about the enemy was already collapsing on its own. The morning work detail was light, sweeping paths between barracks, clearing yesterday's leaves from the edges of walkways. Nothing strenuous, nothing meant to punish. The sun climbed steadily, warming the back of her neck. Arkansas air felt different from Europe's, thicker, slower, as if it expected people to take their time. She worked in silence, broom moving back and forth in even strokes. The rhythm should have calmed her, it usually did, but her hands wouldn't quite obey. The handle vibrated faintly beneath her grip, though she knew it wasn't moving. Her fingers were trembling. She stopped, annoyed with herself, and flexed them once, twice. The tremor did not fade. It traveled instead, settling into her wrists, then her forearms, a quiet insistence she couldn't shake. She tried to focus on the task, on the sound of bristles against dirt, on the pattern forming at her feet, anything that belonged to the present. It didn't work. The smell came back to her suddenly. Butter, warm, fading, but unmistakable. It rose without warning, filling the space behind her eyes. She swallowed hard and leaned slightly on the broom to steady herself. The memory returned. Not gentle this time, sharper. Her mother at the counter in Dresden, the ritual of spreading butter thin, the lie repeated every morning. You take it, I don't need much. Her mother's cracked hands, the burnt grain coffee, the smile that insisted even when there was nothing left to give. Greta blinked hard, the present rushing back in a blur. The path in front of her remained half swept. Somewhere nearby, a guard's voice drifted past. Casual, unconcerned. Her chest tightened. She understood then what her mind had been circling since breakfast, refusing to land. She had eaten better that morning than her mother had in months. The thought did not come with drama. It arrived quietly, like a sentence finished too late. It settled into her with terrible clarity. rearranging everything around it. She leaned forward slightly, as if the weight of it required adjustment. Her gaze dropped to the ground. She watched a line of ants crossing the path, each one carrying something invisible. Her hands shook harder now. She clenched them into fists, nails biting into her palms. The sensation barely registered. She was not hungry. That was the cruelest part. Her stomach was full, warm, satisfied. The butter had melted easily against her tongue. The coffee had burned, then soothed. She had eaten without counting, without choosing which bite to sacrifice. Her family could not do that. Her mother would be standing in a line somewhere. Ration card folded and unfolded until the edges frayed, or perhaps she was no longer standing at all. The thought slid in uninvited, cold and precise. She bent her head. Not enough to draw attention, just enough to break eye contact with the world. She did not cry. Crying would have required release, sound, movement. This was something else. Her breath stayed even. Her shoulders did not shake. Only her hands betrayed her, trembling as if they belonged to someone else. Around her, work continued. Brooms moved, boots stepped, the camp functioned as it always did. No one noticed the small inward collapse taking place in the middle of an ordinary morning. That was how it happened. Not with shouting, not with despair, with comparison. She thought of the food trucks she had seen on the journey here, endless lines of them, moving with mechanical patience along roads that stretched farther than she could imagine, warehouses bigger than entire neighborhoods back home, fields that did not look exhausted. She had not allowed herself to think about it then. It had seemed irrelevant, abstract. Now it was unavoidable. This country had food to spare, not hidden, not hoarded, not guarded as treasure. It was leaving butter on plates uneaten. The distance between that fact and her family's kitchen felt suddenly unbearable, not just in miles, but in meaning. It was not simply that one place had more and another had less. It was that one place treated abundance as normal, while the other had learned to survive its absence. Her knees weakened without warning. She steadied herself against the broom handle again, pressing her forehead briefly against the wood. The grain was rough, solid, real. She stayed like that for a moment longer than necessary. When she straightened, her face was composed. If anyone looked at her, they would see only a woman pausing mid-task, catching her breath. Nothing remarkable. Inside, something essential had shifted. She understood now why kindness frightened her more than cruelty. Cruelty could be blamed. Cruelty explained suffering. Cruelty fit the story she had been taught to tell herself about the world. This did not. This kindness, unasked for unadvertised, left her no enemy to hate. It forced her to face a different truth. That suffering had not been inevitable. That somewhere things had been done differently. She finished her work. At noon, when the bell rang again, she walked back toward the dining hall with the others. Her steps were steady. Her hands still shook, but less now, as if exhaustion had claimed them. The smell met her at the door once more. Bacon, coffee, bread. She closed her eyes for half a second before entering, not in anticipation, in surrender. Because she understood at last, it was not America that had broken her. It was the realization that it had not needed to. The line moved again. That was the first thing she noticed. The way the morning resumed, as if nothing inside her had shifted. Boots on packed dirt, names called without urgency. The camp inhaled and exhaled, steady, unbothered by the quiet collapse she carried from the path back to the dining hall. She took her place near the end, eyes lowered, senses sharpened. After yesterday, she expected something to change, a look, a rule, a correction. Instead, the door swung open and the smell came out to meet them, unchanged. Bacon, coffee, bread. The hook caught immediately. They hadn't adjusted anything. No reduction, no pause, no gesture to suggest yesterday had been a favor that needed acknowledging. It was still breakfast, still routine, still there whether she was ready for it or not. Inside the room filled the same way it always did, the same beams, the same light, the same sounds arranged into order. She felt an odd pressure in her chest, not fear this time, but attention, as if the room itself was asking her to look more closely. She noticed the guards first, not as a group, as individuals. One sat at a table near the wall, tray balanced on his knees. He leaned back slightly as he ate. One boot hooked around the rung of his chair. Another stood near the counter, mug in hand, steam fogging his glasses as he took a sip. They ate without hurry, without ceremony. They were eating the same food. The realization landed slowly. Eggs, bacon, bread, coffee. No separate line, no different portions, no better plates. Their mugs were the same dull ceramic. Their bread was cut from the same loaf. She watched Henrik serve them without distinction, the same scoop, the same count, the same unremarkable care. This was not performance. If it were, it would have been louder. She carried her tray to a table and sat. The bench creaked beneath her. Across from her, an American soldier lowered himself onto the opposite bench, nodding once, a greeting, nothing more. He didn't look at her long. He didn't avoid her either. He ate. She studied his hands as he worked his fork through the eggs. Broad hands, clean nails, no tremor. He ate steadily, as if he expected the food to be there tomorrow. And the next day. And the day after that. That expectation felt like power, not the kind she had been taught to fear. Not power as domination or volume or threat. This was quieter, settled. A confidence that did not need to announce itself. She lifted her mug, took a sip. The coffee tasted the same as yesterday, bitter, strong, unchanged by her thoughts. She realized then that nothing in this room required her reaction. The system functioned whether she trusted it or not, whether she resented it or not. It did not demand belief, it simply worked. Her mind returned unbidden to the journey across the ocean, to the long trains that carried them through landscapes that seemed unreal, cities that stretched without interruption, rail yards filled with locomotives idling in neat rows, waiting their turn, factories whose roofs ran on longer than entire neighborhoods back home. She had tried not to look then, tried not to think in numbers. Numbers were dangerous. Numbers led to conclusions. Now she could not avoid them. She remembered overhearing a guard speak once, casually, to another. Something about production, about planes. The figure had sounded exaggerated, almost comical. 96,000 aircraft in a year. She had dismissed it as bravado, propaganda turned inward. But sitting here now, watching bacon disappear from plates without comment, she began to understand that it might not have been exaggeration at all. This country did not ration confidence. It produced Liberty ships. The guards had said that too. Ships built faster than they could be sunk. Launched, loaded, sent out again, steel and grain and fuel moving across oceans in steady waves. She thought of Germany at the end. Factories bombed into skeletons, trains that never arrived, orders that contradicted one another because no one wanted to admit the truth. Here the truth sat plainly on the table. She watched the soldier across from her tear his bread in half, not to save it, but to dip it into the eggs. He wiped his fingers on a napkin and folded it once before setting it aside. No one noticed, no one cared. She found herself thinking, not accusing, not angry, simply curious. If this was the enemy, why had she been taught to expect monsters? The question surfaced gently, without heat. It did not demand an answer. It lingered. She remembered the films they had been shown. Grainy images of Americans shouting, striking, laughing over suffering. She remembered the words used to describe them: decadent, cruel, weak. A people softened by excess, dangerous because they lacked discipline. This room contradicted all of it. There was discipline here, not imposed, but assumed, the kind that came from systems that functioned without constant force, from people who expected rules to be followed because they made sense. She ate another bite, chewed, swallowed. The soldier finished his coffee and stood. He picked up his tray and nodded again. The same small gesture as before. When he passed behind her, his shoulder brushed the back of her chair. Lightly. He murmured an apology without stopping. It startled her more than shouting would have. Not because it was kind, but because it was reflexive, because it had not been weighed or chosen, because it cost him nothing. She sat very still, the fork resting against the edge of her plate. Power didn't look like cruelty. That realization settled in her with unexpected weight. For years, power had been described to her as something that must be demonstrated, enforced, proved. Victory, she had been told, required humiliation of the defeated. Strength demanded spectacle. Here there was no spectacle. The guards did not loom. The food was not paraded. The rules were not recited daily. The camp did not need her fear to operate. It needed her to eat, to work, to sleep. She looked around the room again, this time seeing it not as a trap, but as a machine. Not cold, not warm, simply effective. Well-fed prisoners caused fewer problems. She had heard that once. Phrased without apology. It had sounded cynical at the time. Now it sounded practical. Practicality did not require hatred. Practicality did not require cruelty. The thought opened a space in her mind she had not known was there. A space where strength and restraint could exist together. Where victory did not require degradation. She finished her meal and stood. As she carried her tray back, she noticed something else she had overlooked before. No one rushed the prisoners. The line moved at a human pace, trays stacked neatly, waste collected without comment. The room emptied gradually, not all at once. The guards finished when they finished. Time was not being used as a weapon. Outside, the sun had climbed higher. Work details were already forming. Trucks idled near the fence, engines steady, ready to move supplies, not prisoner supplies, crates stamped with numbers she didn't understand, stacked with care. She paused, watching them. This was a country that could afford patience, that she realized was its greatest advantage. Not simply abundance, but the confidence that abundance would continue, that tomorrow would arrive with more of the same, that feeding enemies today did not endanger victory tomorrow. As she walked toward her assignment, the question returned, clearer now, no longer tentative. If this is the enemy, then who lied to us? It was not an accusation yet, not anger, just recognition. The kind that arrives when two ideas can no longer coexist. She had believed power required cruelty. She had believed mercy was weakness. Here mercy appeared to be policy, not celebrated, not announced, simply applied. She did not know what to do with that knowledge yet. It was too large to confront all at once. But she felt its presence as she lifted her tools, as she took her place in line, as she moved through a system that did not demand her submission, only her participation. For the first time since her capture, she understood something fundamental. This war had not been won by shouting louder, or striking harder, or hating more fiercely. It had been won by a country that could build faster than it destroyed, feed even those it defeated, and move forward without needing to prove every morning that it was strong. She worked the rest of the day with that thought beside her, not comforting, not yet, but undeniable. The thing that stayed with her was not the food, it was the timing. She noticed it one afternoon while standing near the edge of the dining hall, waiting for her turn to return a tray. The clock above the doorway clicked forward with a soft, regular sound. Its second hand moved without hesitation, no stutter, no drift. When the minute changed, the bell rang exactly once. Not early, not late. On cue. The line advanced. She felt the hook then. The quiet pull of something larger than routine, because nothing here appeared rushed, yet nothing lagged. The room moved as if guided by an agreement no one needed to restate. It just worked. The kitchen behind the counter moved the same way. Trays slid along in sequence. Pans rotated off heat before they burned. Coffee was poured, replaced, poured again. When something ran low, it was already being replenished. No shouting, no improvisation, no visible strain. She had grown up in places where systems failed loudly, where clocks stopped during air raids and never quite resumed the same rhythm, where schedules became suggestions, then jokes, then memories, where people waited not for minutes but for news, and learned not to trust either. Here the clock kept time whether anyone looked at it or not. She began to notice these details everywhere, the way trucks arrived when they were supposed to, the way tools were returned to the same hooks at the end of the day, the way work assignments were posted clearly in the same place every morning. No changes scribbled in the margins. No whispered corrections. Nothing about it felt heroic. That was the point. This America did not feel like a story being told. It felt like a place being maintained. She remembered the words she had heard one of the older guards use once, speaking to a visiting officer. He had said it without pride, without complaint. Consistency keeps people calm. At the time, she had not understood what he meant. Now she did. Consistency created trust, not the emotional kind, the practical kind, the kind that allowed people to stop bracing for collapse. At night, lying on her bunk, she found herself replaying small scenes from the day, not conversations, not confrontations, movements, sequences, the dining hall filling, emptying, resetting, the way the same men appeared at the same posts day after day without resentment, the way disagreements, when they happened, were brief and quiet, resolved with gestures instead of volume. She compared it unwillingly to home, to the Germany of the last years, where factories stood silent not because there was nothing to do, but because there was nothing left to organize, where rail schedules were revised so often they lost meaning, where orders contradicted one another because no one wanted to accept responsibility for the truth, where everything felt provisional, temporary. Here, even the temporary structures, the wooden barracks, the makeshift fences, felt intended, as if they belonged to a larger plan that extended beyond them. She did not romanticize it. She had seen enough to know no place was pure. There were guards who looked at her with open hostility, civilians outside the camp who spat on the ground when the work crews passed. Grief did not vanish simply because a war ended, but the system absorbed those moments without unraveling. It did not depend on everyone agreeing. It depended on enough people doing their jobs. That distinction mattered. One afternoon, as she wiped down tables after lunch, she noticed something she had overlooked for weeks. A small sign near the kitchen door, not a slogan, not a warning, a schedule. Times listed in plain lettering. Breakfast 6:30, lunch 1200, dinner 1800, cleaning rotations, maintenance checks. The paper was worn at the edges, thumbed and replaced so often the corners had softened. It was mundane. She realized then that she was standing inside something her own country had lost long before it lost the war. Reliability. She imagined American families far from this camp. Mothers setting tables at the same hour every night. Children walking to schools that opened on time. Factories changing shifts with whistles that still meant something. She imagined it not as an advertisement, but as a memory. Because even as she lived inside it, she sensed that this version of America belonged to a specific moment, a convergence of urgency and unity, a time when disagreements existed but did not paralyze function. She wondered what would happen when the war fully receded, when the shared purpose dissolved, when the pressure that had forced everything into alignment eased. Would the clocks still keep time? Years later, much later, people would speak of this era with a particular tone, not celebratory, not bitter, something quieter. They knew how to get things done back then. She did not have those words yet, but she felt their shape forming. She could not help comparing it to what she imagined America might become. She had no images, no certainty, only a sense that cohesion once lost was difficult to rebuild, that systems depended not just on resources but on willingness. Willingness to show up, willingness to accept limits, willingness to function even when consensus was imperfect. This America, this camp, this routine felt held together by those choices, not because it was better people, because it was a better agreement. She stood one evening near the fence as the sun dropped low, painting the yard in long shadows. A train horn sounded in the distance, steady and unhurried. Somewhere an engine coughed, then settled into rhythm. The sound carried far. She thought of the questions that would be asked someday, by people who had not lived this moment, by grandchildren, by students, by citizens trying to understand a past that felt both admirable and unreachable. Was it really like that? Did things really work that way? Were people really that united? She had no simple answer, only this. It wasn't perfect, but it was consistent, and consistency, she had learned, could hold a society together when belief could not. As darkness settled, the camplights flicked on one by one, evenly spaced. No sudden glare. She watched them glow into place and felt an unexpected ache, not for her home, for this version of America, an America that did not shout about its strength, that did not confuse noise with power, that measured success by whether things functioned tomorrow as they had today. She wondered, not accusingly, not bitterly, would this country remember how to do that? And she suspected that someday, far from this camp, people would watch stories like hers and ask themselves the same question. Are we still that America? The question lingered in the warm evening air, unanswered, and for the first time she understood that memory itself could become a kind of distance, not measured in miles, but in how far a nation drifts from the habits that once made it work. The announcement came on a Tuesday. Lieutenant Webb stood at the front of the dining hall after the evening meal, hands clasped behind his back, voice measured, not loud but clear enough to carry. The Red Cross had made a request. Each prisoner would be permitted to write one letter home, English or German. No restrictions on content. The letters would be mailed within the week. He said it as if it were simple, as if paper and ink could cross an ocean and find someone still standing on the other side. Greta felt something tighten in her chest. Around her, women shifted in their seats. Some leaned forward, others went very still. A few began to cry quietly, hands over mouths, as if the permission itself had broken something loose. She did not cry. She sat with her hands folded on the table, watching the lieutenant finish his announcement, watching him leave, watching the room slowly empty as women returned to the barracks, moving differently now, as if they carried new weight. That night, she sat on her bunk with a single sheet of paper, a pencil, and no idea what to say. The blank page stared back at her. What she wanted to write was simple. Mama, I am safe. They feed us bacon and real coffee. I think of you every morning. But the words would not come, because beneath them was the truth she could not say. I eat better here than you have in years. I am warm while you are cold. I am a prisoner who lives better than you who are free. She stared at the paper for an hour. The pencil felt heavy in her hand. Around her other women wrote, some quickly, others in fits and starts, pausing to wipe their eyes, to steady their breathing. She watched them without watching, her mind somewhere else, somewhere between what was true and what could be spoken. Finally she began. Her handwriting was careful. Each letter formed with precision, as if accuracy could make up for what she could not say. Dear Mama, I am at a camp in Arkansas. I am safe. We are fed 3 meals daily, more than I expected. The guards are not cruel. I think of you every morning when I drink my coffee. I do not know when I will come home. I do not know what I will find when I do. But I want you to know I survived. I will continue to survive. Please eat, please rest, please wait for me. Your daughter, Greta, she read it over twice, then folded it once, cleanly, along the center line. What she did not write filled the margins of her mind, that the bacon tasted better than anything she remembered, that the guards ate the same food she did, that she felt guilty for being warm, that she was terrified her mother was already gone. She handed the letter to Lieutenant Webb the next morning. He took it without comment, added it to the stack, nodded once. That was all. The waiting began after that. Each day mail was distributed in the yard. Names called from a list, women stepping forward to claim envelopes that had crossed an ocean. Some opened them immediately. Others held them unopened, as if the weight of them was enough. Greta's name was never called. She told herself the mail was slow, that the war had disrupted everything, that her mother was writing back, that any day now. But she knew. On some level, she had known since the day she ate that first piece of bacon. The weeks passed, September turned cool, the leaves began to change. Work details continued, meals arrived on schedule, the clock kept time, and still no letter came. She stopped expecting it. One morning in late September, the gate opened. No ceremony, no speeches, just a list. Names read aloud, crossed off when answered. Hartmann Greta. She stepped forward. A guard she did not recognize checked her name against the paper, made a mark, gestured toward the truck. That was it. She carried a small bundle in her hands, clothes folded too carefully, habits slower to leave than fences. No one hugged her. No one said goodbye. Lieutenant Webb nodded from across the yard, the same nod he had given 100 times before. Polite, finished. The truck idled. Patient. As she climbed aboard, the smell reached her one last time. Coffee, faint now, caught in the wood of the buildings, in the fabric of her coat. It lingered as the truck pulled away. She did not look back. The journey home took weeks. Trains that stopped for reasons no one explained, ships that waited in harbors for clearance that came slowly, waiting rooms that smelled of damp paper and old smoke, languages changing at each border, the world rearranging itself in ways she did not yet understand. Europe looked different, not just damaged, hollow, as if something essential had been scooped out and not replaced. She crossed into Germany in early December. The cold came fast, settling into her bones, the kind of cold she had forgotten existed. Streets were broken, buildings stood in pieces, walls with no roofs, roofs with no walls. People moved through the rubble with their heads down, eyes older than their years. She arrived in Dresden on a grey afternoon. The station was still standing, barely. Parts of the roof had collapsed. The platforms were cracked, but the tracks remained, and the trains still came. She stepped onto the platform and waited. Her mother did not come. She had not expected her to, but some part of her had hoped anyway. She walked. The streets she remembered were gone, replaced by paths through debris. She turned corners that no longer existed, followed memory more than landmarks. When she reached the building where her mother had lived, she found it partially standing, the front wall intact, the rest open to the sky. A woman was sweeping the steps. Greta recognized her, Frau Weber, a neighbor, older now, thinner, but alive. Frau Weber looked up. Her face changed, not surprise, something quieter. Greta, it was not a question. Yes? Frau Weber set the broom aside. She did not smile. She did not embrace her. She simply stood there for a moment, as if gathering the right words. Your mother, she said finally, softly. She held on as long as she could. Greta nodded. She had known. But hearing it was different. The winter of 44, Frau Weber continued. The food ran out. She gave her rations to the children in the building, all of them. She said they were growing, that she didn't need much. The words landed like stones. Greta stood very still. She didn't suffer long, Frau Weber added. As if that mattered. Greta nodded again. She thanked Frau Weber. Her voice sounded distant, as if it belonged to someone else. Then she walked away. She climbed the stairs to the apartment. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything was sparse, clean, empty. The table was still there. The same table from her memory, scrubbed, worn smooth. On the shelf she found her mother's ration cards, stacked, dated, the last one from November 1944. She held it in her hand. Then she sat at the table. And finally, she cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, the way grief arrives when it has been waiting. Grief. She cried for the letter her mother would never read, for the bacon she had eaten while her mother starved, for the coffee that had been real, for the butter that had melted. For the mornings she had been warm. She cried because there was no one left to forgive her. And because she understood now that forgiveness was not the point. The point was that it had happened. That she had survived, that her mother had not, and nothing would ever make that fair. She survived. In the months and years that followed, she worked, clearing rubble, rebuilding what could be rebuilt. Germany changed around her, slowly, painfully, with help that arrived not as punishment, but as investment. The Marshall Plan brought money, materials, the kind of systematic rebuilding she had seen in Arkansas. Not spectacle, just function. She watched her country learn democracy the hard way, awkwardly, imperfectly, but she recognized the shape of it. She had seen it before. In a camp far from home, in routines that worked because enough people believed they should. She did not speak much about the war. When asked, she chose her words carefully. She told people that enemies were not always what they were taught to be, that strength could look like restraint, that being fed when you expected punishment could change the direction of a life. She never mentioned the bacon specifically, but she thought about it often. She thought about the clock that kept time, about the guards who ate the same food, about the system that functioned without needing her fear. She thought about the question she had asked in the middle of an Arkansas work detail, who lied to us? And she thought about the question that had formed later, the one she could not answer. Would we still be that America she married? She raised children. She grew old in a Germany that looked nothing like the one she had left. Every morning she made coffee the same way, carefully, without hurry. The smell filled the kitchen before anyone else woke. It reminded her of a place where fear had ended quietly, where no one had been watching, where kindness had done its work and moved on. Her children asked about the war sometimes. She told them what she could. She told them that survival was not the same as victory, that guilt was not the same as responsibility, that memory was a kind of debt you could never fully repay. She told them to ask questions, to distrust easy answers, to remember that every generation believed itself to be living in exceptional times, and that exceptionalism was often just another word for forgetting. In 1985, a university student came to interview her for a project about prisoners of war, about survival, about memory. They sat in her small apartment in Munich. The student set up a camera, asked permission to record. Greta nodded. The questions were predictable at first. What was it like? Were you afraid? How did you survive? She answered them simply, without embellishment. Then the student asked something different. What do you want people to know about that time? Greta was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke. The war was not won by shouting louder, or striking harder, or hating more fiercely. She paused. It was won by a country that could build faster than it destroyed, that could feed even those it defeated. That moved forward without needing to prove every morning that it was strong. The student waited, sensing there was more. Greta looked directly at the camera. I want them to ask themselves, she said slowly, if war returned tomorrow, if the world broke again the way it broke then, would we still be that America? She let the question hang there. The student waited for her to continue, to answer her own question, to provide comfort or conclusion. But Greta said nothing more, because the question was not hers to answer. It belonged to the people who would come after, the people who would inherit the systems, the clocks, the routines, the quiet agreements that held nations together. It belonged to the people who would decide whether reliability mattered more than spectacle, whether consistency mattered more than noise, whether the hard work of showing up every day mattered more than the easy work of shouting about strength. She had lived long enough to see nations forget these things, to see systems collapse not from external pressure but from internal neglect, to see people stop believing that tomorrow would resemble today, and to watch what happened when that belief died. She had no answers, only the question. The camera kept recording. Greta sat in the silence, hands folded, face calm. She had said what she came to say. The rest was up to them. Years later, when she died quietly in her sleep at the age of 82, her children found a small box in her apartment. Inside was the ration card from November 1944. Her mother's last one. And beneath it, a letter. The letter she had written in Arkansas. The one she had handed to Lieutenant Webb. The one that had never been mailed. Someone had returned it to her. Years later, with a note attached. We regret to inform you that this letter could not be delivered. The addressee was deceased before the date of mailing. She had kept it all those years, not as a memorial, but as a reminder that some debts could never be paid, some distances could never be crossed, some questions could never be answered. But they still had to be asked. On the back of the envelope, in her careful handwriting, she had written one line, a line that was found after her death, that was quoted in her obituary, that was repeated by her children and their children, and the students who studied her story. If we forget how to be that country, we will deserve what comes next. It was not a warning, it was an observation. The kind that only comes from someone who had lived on both sides of the question, who had seen what systems looked like when they worked, and what they looked like when they failed, who had eaten bacon in a prison camp and understood that kindness was not weakness, that strength was not cruelty, that power was not performance, who had learned that the hardest question was not whether you could win a war, but whether you could remember afterward what made you worth fighting for. The question remained unanswered, not because there was no answer, but because the answer changed with each generation that chose to ask it, or chose not to. In a small apartment in Munich, the coffee pot sat cold on the stove. The morning ritual, unbroken for 40 years, had finally ended. But the question she left behind, written on the back of an undelivered letter, spoken into a camera in 1985, lived in the memory of everyone who knew her story. That question would outlive them all. Would we still be that America? The bacon had long since been eaten. The war had long since ended. The camps had long since closed. But the question remained. Waiting.